Hi folks, and welcome to the week 10 focus video for MH510 in the fall of 2024. This week we're going to be talking about memory in history, new trends in history. I love the image on the front of the slide packet with the men working their way through. I'm not sure whether it's a bookstore or whether it is a library, but in the aftermath of bombing in London, it's pretty cool. The last week of this question, dealing with characteristics and strengths and weaknesses, discussion question 1, beginning in the 1980s but emerging fully in the 1990s, was a fruitful branch that grew out of postmodernism. The analysis of history and memory, how we remember, how that remembering changes over time, how we commemorate events in the past. One great example of a traditionalist historian who merged with this is Carol Reardon in her work Pickett's Charge in History and Memory. But along with the excellent work, there have been less useful examples of history and memory. Based on your reading from the course overall and from this week's reading, what are the characteristics of the history of memory? What strength does the examination of memory bring to the field of history, and what weaknesses lie within this approach? And your second discussion question: to what extent and how does memorialization, the creation and preservation of monuments, fit into the school of history and memory? Sort of brings in a little public history here. For the first discussion question, these are some things to consider. Oral history is an aspect of, but not the only aspect of, memory and history. The popular and cultural memory of an event is also an aspect of memory. And the memorialization of an event is also an aspect. The changing scholarly and popular interpretation of a historical event are also a piece of this. The lost cause, consensus, new left, race, class, and gender interpretations of Pickett's Charge. You can see Carol Reardon's Pickett's Charge in History and Memory and see how she teases out some of that. Can different groups, states, nations have a different cultural memory of an event? And whose memory is valid? All right, discussion question 2. To what extent and how does memorialization, the creation and preservation of monuments, fit into the school of history and memory? Individuals, groups of individuals, and society as a whole remember events. For whom are monuments erected and maintained? What is the proper approach as individuals, groups of individuals, and society as a whole develop and change in terms of monuments erected in the past? What is the proper approach as individuals, groups of individuals, and society as a whole develop and change in terms of monuments erected in the past? Is the proper approach the removal of objectionable monuments, or is it the contextualization of that monument the appropriate response to changing memories of the event on the part of individuals, groups, individuals, or society as a whole? See the photos attached to this week's DQ2. What do they tell us about how each of the countries chose to memorialize the deaths of their mostly young men in the First World War? Your final historiographic essay is due Sunday evening, the November 3rd, 2024 at 11:55 p.m. Eastern Time. There are no extensions for late papers. Properly formatted cover sheet. See the template from the rant. Actually, it's not on the rant. It's in the instructor office. and I'll make sure I post it again. Put your name in the document title. The body of the text should be double-spaced 12-point Times New Roman font. I ask for Times New Roman for a reason. If you put it in Arial or one of the other more, should I say, modern or maybe postmodern fonts, my eyes tend to see that as a series of vertical lines. So please put it in Times New Roman. Chicago Manual of Style, 17th edition, 14th chapter, notes and bibliography footnotes, not parenthetical and not endnotes. Oh, by the way, the 18th edition is out, but use the 17th edition. Footnotes ought to be first line indented by 1/2 inch, 10-point Times New Roman font, and single-spaced. It should be a properly formatted book bibliography, not an annotated bibliography. First line should be hanging 12-point Times New Roman font, single-spaced, listed alphabetically by the author's last name. Some other little pieces here on the Final Historiographic Essay. Two approaches that tend to work. Both of them are argument-focused. Here's where your annotated bibliography is applied. You can move from argument to argument, weave the various authors who make those arguments together. You can either address counter-arguments immediately, I'm trying to come up with a quick example off the top of my head. Lee should have leaned into Longstreet's recommendation to move to a defensive position and draw the Union Army to them for the second day of Gettysburg. The counter-argument would be that given the terrain and everything else, it was impossible to move the Army of Northern Virginia to such a position. And weave those argument and counter-argument together. Or you can treat them as separate arguments. Go through one set of arguments and then deal with the counter-arguments or the alternative arguments as separate pieces. Your thesis for this kind of an essay would be historians agree on topic XXX here and here, and they disagree there and there. That's method number one, argument to argument. Or you can start with the earliest scholarly secondary historiography and trace the development of the topic and its changing interpretation over time. The thesis would equal the interpretation of topic XX has changed from a fill-in-the-blank interpretation to a fill-in-the-blank interpretation. The classic example for this is in 1950, Columbus's discovery of America was a celebratory interpretation. The change over time has been to one that is much more nuanced and critical of the Columbian Exchange and Columbus's discovery of America. What does not work is going author by author, title by title, developing your own argument. The outcomes range from poor for the first, argument by argument, title by title, to failure if you develop your own argument as opposed to dealing with the historiography. Do not data dump between seminars. One thing that has become apparent of late is this: students data dump between each seminar. Do not forget your Chicago Manual of Style and all the little things I harp on. Continue to think about authors and readings in terms of school, methods, subfields, and approaches. Also continue to think about the significance and importance, the criticality really, of a good, strong thesis statement to unify your writing. Don't data dump. Okay? All right. With that, we've only got one more week after this. That will be week 11, my favorite week of the term. 1, because I'm grading your final papers. 2, because I really, really like, well, to some extent, both of the questions, but one of them in particular. So with that, y'all take care, stay safe, and I'll see you around the campus. Bye-bye.